So, And welcome back. I am living proof that being openly gay on the airwaves is not a strange thing. But there was a time when being out as a member of the LGBT community on air or in the newsroom was something unique indeed. And we're here with one of the veterans of that, Akilah Bolden-Monifa. Welcome, Akilah.
Thank you, David.
And congratulations. I understand you have a new title, Director of Communications at CBS-5.
The new title is Market Communications
Wow.
Director. So it's even more, it's encompassing all the CBS television and radio stations in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah. Did you ever think, as a little lesbian of color, that you would ever be a bigwig in a media market?
No, I never did. I feel like a mini Oprah, except that I'm behind the scenes. This wasn't my vision. I'm happy to be living this life, but no, I didn't think so.
Yeah. I mean, all kidding aside, what has gone on in the world of media for the LGBT community has been a sea change. We were chatting before the cameras went live that a long time ago, I guess now 20 years ago, Roy Aarons, who was the then editor of the Oakland Tribune, started a group called the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association. And I remember he did a survey of gays in the newsroom. And I remember that survey because I was working with him at the time on it. And there were a lot of people that didn't want to take the survey. They were just afraid to. Do you think that homophobia still exists in the news media?
Unfortunately, I think that it does. Maybe at a lesser degree than it was 20 years ago when you told me about the group that you started, and when NLGJA, I think at a lesser degree, but it still exists. And I think it's coupled with in news that we have this notion that everything is, we're supposed to have the appearance of not being biased regardless. Some things we obviously wear on our sleeves, so to speak. So it's obvious issues of race and gender, sometimes issues of sexual orientation or sexual identity are not so obvious. So I think that also is complicit in people not being out in the newsroom. But as you know, at CBS-5 at KPIX, we had one of the first openly gay reporters in our newsroom, Hank Plant, exactly, who retired recently from our station. But a lot of people didn't know also that Tony Russomanno, who worked at our station, was also out. And as you know, there are various degrees of being out. Hank, his being out wasn't so much a part of his stories, even though he did cover a lot of gay issues, but his beat was politics. So again, he was supposed to be unbiased, and people only really knew what they saw about him. And even when he retired not too long ago, he was interviewed by Ron Owens at KGO, who had no idea that Hank Plant was gay.
There's a wonderful book that's just come out about another wonderful icon in Bay Area journalism, Belva Davis.
Yes.
I forget the title, but I think it's something like A Life I
Never in my wildest dreams.
Never in my wildest dreams.
Yes.
This is a broad question, a leading question. What has been more challenging for you, or has it been challenging, being out as a lesbian or being a person of color working in news? Have you come against racism and homophobia in equal degrees, or has it not been an issue in your career?
I think in equal degrees. And I think that in some ways, me being a woman of color, me being a person of African descent is obvious to folks. Me being a lesbian is obvious to me, but it's not obvious to other folks. So that's more of the hidden part. So I think that the race issue in news media, where most people are not folks of color, and I'd also add gender as well, because the majority of people in news are also men. So
yeah, I mean, there really is still a glass ceiling.
Definitely so. I mean, particularly when it comes to management. I mean, on air, there's more parity, but when it comes to management, and also when it comes to engineering and other behind-the-scenes professionals like that, or even photography. I mean, most newsrooms don't have that many female photographers, videographers as well. Now that's changing, particularly now with our station and other stations moving to the multimedia journalism platform, and now everyone is being trained not only how to appear in front of the camera, but how to shoot and how to edit their stories as well.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago when the social media and internet boom really kind of impacted, or started to impact, quote-unquote, mainstream journalism. A colleague of mine, Dan Kerman, talked about the speech he got at another Bay Area station, and they suddenly said one day, now you're not going to have a producer anymore, and you're not going to have a camera person, and you're not going to have a van, but here's this wonderful little camera and a tripod, and we want you to learn how to set it up and do the whole thing yourself. What has that revolution done, from your point of view, to how we gather and transmit news?
Honestly, I think that it's improved it, because in the old days when people did one thing, that's all you knew how to do. And so the stories were somewhat informed by that, because as a reporter, the person was limited to, this is what I can get for my camera person's going to get. Maybe you wouldn't have the B-roll shot that you needed. You wouldn't have exactly what you want. It wouldn't be edited the way that you wanted to have it edited. This way, you have control of the entire story. So I think it's really helped storytelling. Mm-hmm. And for someone like me who has mainly worked in terms of in public relations and communications, and now has also made the transition to producing, it really has opened up my eyes as well to have the opportunity to not only know how to produce, but also how to edit, particularly now that everything's going digital. Yeah. And you can do these things on your desktop.
Yeah. There's a wonderful fan page on Facebook called Flacks and Hacks that I think Nate Ballard, former spokesperson for then Mayor Gavin Newsom, put online. And I've always loved those two phrases. I've never shied away from being a flack in the communications, and now you've gone from being a flack for a station to being a hack, a producer. How did those two careers meld for you, and how do they help each other? Well, are you a better producer because you were on the PR side before?
I think so. I definitely think so. And I think that anyone who knows more about whatever the medium is better at whatever the original job is. And I'm still a flack. And yes, I'm still a hack. So the majority part of my job is being a flack for the television stations and the radio stations. But it's really been good to know and understand and actually do the producing part. Because now I understand, and I think also that producers relate better to me, the news producers relate better to me as well. And I think that the anchors and reporters have a newfound respect for me, since I'm more than just a flack, that I also am a producer and I have a real understanding. I've also produced news segments as well. Mm-hmm. We've done some long format interviews with political candidates that the news producers somewhat shied away from because they're used to producing shorter segments within a news. These were hour-long segments, and I was a producer on those. And I definitely think, and as I'm producing, I think about how am I going to pitch this to print media as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it's made me better at both jobs.
People have said, I've actually talked about how the perception is the golden age of TV news was, the 60s, the early 70s, Cronkite and Chandler and all those people. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think that the field wasn't so crowded then. I think that there are a couple of things happening now. I mean, now we live in the 500-channel universe, and many channels are news channels. And then it's beyond television, of course, with the internet and with people's mobile units. So I think that we're struggling now to get eyeballs on whatever our little piece of the pie is. So I think that the actual piece of the pie is much smaller now. I think we're still in an incredible news gathering time. Mm-hmm. It's just that when Cronkite was around, you had 3 stations then, and only 3 stations that did news. I mean, you had radio, but radio wasn't that big. Now with the 500 station universe, with some stations explicitly dedicated to news, I think it just makes it tougher, particularly for local news stations.
Do you think that the role of the gatekeeper is gone or just completely morphed? Now we have 500 gatekeepers as opposed to the 3 networks.
I think, what you'll see, and you've seen this in news, is that we're many times covering the same stories, particularly if it's breaking news. So, let's take recently a local story, the San Bruno fires. Right. I mean, all of the local stations broke in and did wall-to-wall coverage of that. So, and obviously that wasn't something that was pitched. That was breaking news that we covered. And I think it's more difficult for people to break in to gatekeepers if they're trying to pitch a story, whether it's an exclusive or something like that.
And also it can be dangerous. I mean, you mentioned an interesting example. I remember that night, the San Bruno explosion, I was actually off-site at an event with a group of people from the Department of Emergency Management, and we knew something was happening because all of them reached into their pockets and their purses for their cell phones, and they all left. And I would say about half an hour later, there was some report that there had been a plane crash. And actually one station said, it was confirmed because someone had read a tweet. And for a while there was all this confusion. Do you think that would have happened in the days of Cronkite? And is that just the dangers we have now of living in a place where a news source might not be someone that Akilah knows is a verified journalist and is going to check those facts and before they go on air say...
You're right. We clearly make mistakes today because of ourselves as well. We can't just blame the citizen journalists because obviously we still need to vet these things. And actually, it was our station was one of the stations that first reported that it was a plane crash, and it was based upon information that we had. And I think it was beyond just a tweet. I think it was, an official information that obviously was incorrect. I mean, but you've had recently with NPR reporting that Representative Giffords had passed away. I think that sometimes we get sloppy and we don't vet information.
And is that because there's more pressure to get it first as opposed to get it right?
I think that there is a pressure. There's always a pressure to get it first. I mean, the breaking news and the first one on has always been the name of the game. But obviously, we do want to get it right. I don't know that there's more pressure now, but since that there are more avenues available, it's like it's hard to even argue who did get it first because maybe someone online got it first.
You've been in Bay Area media and at CBS-5 for 8 years. You've seen a lot of stories break. What was the worst day on the job for you and the best day on the job for you?
Well, I think probably more recently the San Bruno fires locally was the worst day because there was loss of life and it was something that really impacted and affected the entire Bay Area. So that was probably one of the most recent bad days for me. On my PR side, probably one of the worst days had to do with the Super Bowl when Janet Jackson had her little exposure, and I was a spokesperson on that,
I remember that.
And dealing with other stations. So that was bad. Closely followed by. There are lots of other kind of broader stories. I was thinking of Martha Stewart as well, and that was a very big story. And MoveOn.org actually waged a campaign against our station and other stations and targeted, and I had to respond to all the emails that were coming in. So those are I think some of the low points, I think. And I would also add, we've had, unfortunately, a local anchor who passed away, Doug Murphy, and that was also very, very tragic and very hard to cover, even though people were very polite in their news gathering. But I think anytime it involves death, it's going to be a hard story to cover.
For those people who say the age of TV journalism is past, what do you say? And I'm sure because you've heard it. People say, "Oh, I don't need TV, and it's all online."
Well, studies they do these Pew studies, and they still say that the major source of news for most people is television news. As much as ratings overall have declined, it still is the major source. And I think that the bottom line, regardless of CNNs and online, when the big stories break, people still turn on a television and they want to see, on our station, Katie Couric deliver the news.
And it's like Edward R. Murrow who said, "This thing can educate."
Exactly.
We've been speaking with Akilah Bolden-Monifa from CBS-5. Glad to have her. And just a closing note, I would like to thank everyone here in studio, our crew on the set, back behind the scenes, especially Heather Schultz, for helping us achieve our 3rd year of 10%. And thanks for watching. And since this is the Lunar New Year, I want to reach out to everyone. And I guess, as I should say in Shanghai or Beijing, Wo de min se shi pei da wei, xin qin kuaila. Happy New Year to everyone. I'm David Perry, your host, and this has been 10%. Hope you tune in next week. Thanks so much.